moved to Edmonton about 10 years ago, so I'm kind of an adopted daughter here. I was thinking this morning about my trip to New Zealand, and I thought about that long flight there. And then I started thinking about that in a different way, because it's pretty amazing, really, that in 14 hours I can go from Edmonton, pass a time zone, and end up in a country in a different time zone, a different day. In 14 hours I went from Wednesday to Friday. And I went from fall over here to spring over there. I went through 3 seasons in 14 hours. So that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And it's really kind of a miracle. So that was, reframing that to this morning was really kind of neat for me. I had attended other Healing Our Spirit Worldwide conferences, so when I got an email asking us to do a presentation, I talked to Lewis Cardinal. I was talking to Lewis Cardinal, and he says, oh, we can do one on Kichiaski, which is the Fox Farm project. So this is what we were going to do. We put in our abstract and were accepted. And then Lewis turned out he couldn't go. So, okay, so I guess I'm doing this. Then Bonnie Spencer, a good friend of mine, said, and who also was on the committee, the board for the Kichiaski, said, well, I'll go with you. So the two of us were presenting, and in the end it was Will Campbell, Bonnie Spencer, and myself that did a presentation. They had an awful lot of people wishing to present, and I think they tried to accommodate as many as they could. We were given half an hour, which is pretty short to make a presentation, so we really had to think concise about what we were going to present. So what we talked about was the process up until this point, and kind of an idea of where we wanted to go after that. So, but landing in New Zealand, a friend of ours, Deidre Nehu from New Zealand, had taken a bunch of us under her wing, about 10 of us actually. And my understanding was that she was going to pick me up at the airport, and she didn't. And I was getting a bit panicky because everybody else I knew had left. And however, a phone call was made and somebody picked me up, a roommate actually, and I stayed overnight at her place in Auckland. She had arranged for the 10 of us to stay on a marae. Now, a marae in New Zealand is, Maori is the overall name for the indigenous people, but within that there are various tribes, just like here. And so each of them on their territory have a marae, which is the gathering place, the community gathering place where they entertain dignitaries, where they do ceremonies, where they, and many of them have like artifacts that belong to their tribe. And so, however, I had already signed in to the university, so dorms, so I stayed there the first night, and just the process of coming onto marae is a beautiful ceremony, because you don't just walk in. You come up to the gate, or the entrance, and you are led in by a woman who will ask permission, and it's all done in song, which is beautiful because they're beautiful singers. She will chant and tell who we are and why we're there and why we would like to come onto the marae. And then it's responded to by a woman on the other side of the gate who will then respond and invite us in. And so then we come into the marae and we're seated, and then the formal prayers and formal welcoming is done by the men. But it's a beautiful way to come on there, and they do look after people well. I stayed there the first night, the night before I went, was booked into the dorms. And it was a big sleepover. Mattresses were put down on the floor and we all just lined up like a big sleepover, all 10 of us, 12 of us actually, because a couple of their fellows stayed as well. And the men get up and cook breakfast, and believe me, don't try and offer to help in the kitchen because you'll get shooed out very quickly. I'm used to when I go to somebody's place, it's appropriate to offer to help. But over here, it's not. Over there, no, we look after you. So that was my introduction to New Zealand, and it was a beautiful introduction. I stayed during the conference at the dorms because initially the conference was to be held at the university, and then they realized that it was going to be bigger than what the university could handle. I think we had about 1,300 people attending the conference, and they're from all over. They're from Hawaii, the Pacific Rim Islands, Samoa, Canada, of course, the United States. This year we didn't seem to have from South America, but even so, I was going to bring in the program, but I realized later that this morning that I had given it away to somebody, but it was about that thick and about that big. It was really a coffee table book. And an awful lot of presenters, and as I say, with half an hour each, they were very short. My feeling about many of the ones that I didn't attend were that they were coming from a research aspect, and while I appreciate that research is necessary, I was looking more for hands-on. So my favorite one to go to was the lady who was teaching basket weaving. She was 5 generations. Her granddaughter was the 5th generation of weavers in that family, and it's awesome. Some of the others that I attended were, I tried to attend the ones that were more hands-on rather than the research, because I'm not a research person. And they were all very interesting. My one struggle with the facilities, because they moved us into an arena. And so the breakout rooms were, if you've ever been at a trade show where they put up the scaffolding with little black curtains around them, that was the breakout rooms, row on row in this arena. And so when you're in a presentation, you're hearing some from here and from there. And when we did our presentation, it was that same challenge. What they did do very well was the tech aspect of it. We handed them our little memory stick the day before, and they had our PowerPoint all set up for us and everything, and a timer there so we didn't go over time, and you know, that part was handled really, really well. I think with each having so many presenters, none of them were ever full house, really, you know, because there was just so many things to do. And yeah, where was I going with that? My mind went blank for a moment. The last day that I stayed at the dorms, because the dorms gave us breakfast and supper, and we were on our own for lunch. The last day was really quite neat, because after supper, the Hawaiian contingent stood up and did a hula as a thank you for the event, which led into a totally impromptu 2.5-hour concert with various people there. What a way to finish up the conference. I want to back up a bit, because I had intended to talk about the opening, which was very, very special too. that was done on a marae, and we were welcomed formally with speeches. The King of New Zealand was there, and yes, they do have a king. And it's quite interesting in that he never speaks. He has somebody that does his speaking for him. And so that was who officially, his speaker officially welcomed us. And the expectation was that he would leave immediately after the ceremony. However, he was quite intrigued and he stayed and had lunch with us as well, which was a surprise to the New Zealand people, because apparently he's not in good health. And of course, part of the welcoming is the warriors did the haka. Now, what I learned was that the haka is actually means dance, and there are different reasons for doing it in different dances within that. And one of them is these two grandmothers were the final haka dancers. And it's a dance that only grandmothers do because you have to have the stomach to do it. And a grandma pooch to do it. And it's really a neat thing to see. Yeah, and then a fantastic lunch to finish off the opening ceremony. So it was just amazing. For me, over and above, I stayed another week after I left, after the conference. And I mentioned Deidre, who had taken us under her wing. So when we left the conference, we went back to her place in Auckland. And she has a very little tiny house. So the neighbor next door said, well, I've got some extra bedrooms we're not using, you can put your overflow there. And so, also at the conference, a Maori woman that Deidre had not met before came up to her and said, Deidre, I hear you're looking after people from overseas. And I know we were headed from Auckland, we were going further north down to Wharangi, to the ocean. And she said, I know your house is small, so take mine. It's got 6 bedrooms, that'll be room enough for all of you, and just like that, loaned her house. Not only did she lend her house, but she drove the 3.5 hours from Hamilton down to Wharangi to make sure everything was in order for us and to put on a pot of soup so we'd have something, a crock pot of soup so we'd have something warm to eat when we got there. I mean, it's just, the hospitality of the Maori people are just amazing. So we stayed a couple of days there, and it was like a beautiful little 2-block walk down to the ocean and along the beach. And this is kind of a resort area. So there was, yeah, just beautiful just to sit and watch the waves for a while. And then we went down to Deidre's own territory in Matariki. And Matariki is a really beautiful spot. I could live there. How you get there is, if the tide is out, you can take about a 45-minute walk into her place. If the tide is up, we take the boat. So what we did was everything got loaded onto the boat, and the guys took that around, and we walked the beach up. And just so amazing. At Deidre's place, there's no TV, there's no electricity, no cell phones, no nothing. You just, the house, the lawn, beach, and the ocean. And we did, I had some really neat experiences there in that I had never gone digging for cockles before, which is a shellfish. We went digging for those and had them cooked up for supper. The guys went out on the boat, and this was the big joke because Bonnie Spencer's husband is as fair and white as you can get. The 3 guys with him, one was from Hawaii and the other 2 were Maori men. And the white guy caught all the fish. That was the big joke. What a way to feast with fish that fresh from the ocean and the shellfish. Oh, to die for. So we stayed there, and then we came back to Auckland, and we had, I brought in, I'm not very good with pictures, but I did bring in a calendar that has pictures of the land. New Zealand is a beautiful, beautiful country. It's two main islands, and we were on the North Island, and it's kind of, you have to get your thinking turned around, because we go south too warm, they go north too warm, and so it's reversed. But looking at all, they said, oh, well, nothing is in bloom yet, but what was in bloom was just absolutely beautiful. And in her little house in Auckland, we're right in the middle of the city. The vegetation behind her place, you couldn't even see the building, the other side of the block. You felt like you were in the country, because there was also a little stream that ran through there. And every morning, these 4 ducks would come for breakfast, because she always threw bread out for them in the morning. Then they'd disappear, and you wouldn't see them again until the next day. What a way to wake up. In Auckland, or in New Zealand, with colonization, of course, a lot of things happened. And one of them was that one of the trees that's considered very important and very sacred to the New Zealanders, also because they were tall and straight, they would grow up to, what do they say, 40 to 50 meters tall, were very, very desirable for shipbuilding and for masts for the ship. So a lot of the forests were decimated, and they replanted them with spruce trees or pine trees. And so you'll see a lot of that. And of course, because there's no winter, like here, our trees grow slow because there's that winter period where everything stops growing. There it's year-round. They grow, and they grow very quickly. So that was another thing about New Zealand, is there are no predatory animals. There's no wolves or coyotes or anything like that. There's no poisonous snakes, and there's no deadly spiders or anything like that. So it's really a paradise. And the one thing that was imported, in Australia they brought in rabbits. In New Zealand they brought in possums.
1%.
Possums. Oh. And they are everywhere. Which led to kind of a funny story about our stay at Matariki. Somebody left the door ajar at night. And oh, the other thing, there's no mosquitoes.
I was going to
Wow.
And so the door had been left open, and one of the fellows had decided to sleep out on the veranda. And so during the night, this possum came into the house and woke a few people up. I wasn't one of them, because I was sleeping in another room. And they're trying to shoo it out without, one, cornering it, because I guess they can get quite vicious if they're cornered, and 2, without waking the rest of the household. So they managed to get it shooed out, and it ran right across the guy that was sleeping on the veranda. Which woke him up pretty quick. But I think I'm kind of all over the map with my story, but that's okay. When we came back to Auckland, the reason we came back a couple of days early is Deidre works with the correction services over there in their program on the word's gone out of my head. It's a rehabilitation program, and they work on a marae, and the motto of the marae is from the womb to the tomb. They go into the prisons with posters like this, and I'll pass those around too, because they're absolutely beautiful, which says your journey starts here. And if any of the inmates, and they work with inmates that are lesser crimes. So it would be domestic violence, DUIs, that sort of thing. And if an inmate is interested, he's assessed for the program. And if accepted in the program, then they begin working with him before he ever comes out of jail. But they also connect with his family, with his wife, with his children, with all of his family that's part of his life. And they work with the family. They have schools. They have a school there for the kids. They have parenting programs for the mothers. And as Deidre said, they have social workers, court workers. They even have a funeral home. So from the womb to the tomb. They've got a food bank, everything is there. And when the inmate comes out of jail, he's already connected to this program. They continue with that family for as long as need be. They help him update his work skills if need be, help him find a job, help him find a place to live. It may mean driving him to work. It may mean that he needs work boots, whatever is needed, and they will continue to work with that family until the family can walk on their own. But the file is never closed. If down the road they have a rough patch, they can always come back to the Marae and get the support they need, which is absolutely something I wished we had more of. Here in Edmonton, we do have programs, but they're scattered. It's not one concerted thing where everybody is working on the same thing. And here it seems everybody's got their own little part of the program. But if we could pull it together, I think that we would, I'd be out of a job because I work for corrections too. Which would be okay with me since I officially retired 6 years ago.
Is this just for the Maori people or is it for everybody?
They work with the Maori people. And it's like here in that the highest percentage of inmates are Maori.
And how do they fund it? Is it through a national program or a local?
It's one that the Maori have developed themselves.
So the money
It
comes
would-
from the government?
It would be funded through the corrections, yeah. But it's, so we had an opportunity to spend a day with their staff, learning about what the different roles, the different people. There's one little old lady, and she's such a sweet little grandmother that she never stopped talking. But she was the financial advisor, teaching them budgeting, teaching them how to shop for groceries, how to cook. Like, it's just amazing what they do there. And yeah, that was, if you don't mind, I'm going to sit. Can everybody's seen enough of me anyway. So that was, to me, more than what I got out of the conference itself was the highlight of my trip, was to be able to spend those 2 days. We went back the second day and we did a pipe ceremony with them, and we were interviewed. Also on this Marae, they have their own TV station and their own radio station. And so we were interviewed for both of those, so whatever that's worth.
Those pictures remind me of the movie that came out about 10 years ago. Well, Ryder, about the Maori girl.
Yes.
And if you have questions, does each Marae have its own program, or is this an overall Maori?
This is one Marae that has this, that is open to all of the Maori
Whatever
inmates.
tribe they were.
Yeah, that isn't a tribal thing, this is the program.
Okay.
And
Nice.
yeah, and it's pretty amazing. One of the, Deidre's husband, who passed away about 10 years ago, is still spoken and sung about in the Maori community because he was well known as an activist. And one of the things that he was able to accomplish was, in New Zealand there was one treaty signed with the government, and through that, like here, many of the indigenous people lost their land. What he accomplished was that he got the tribes to cooperate. It wasn't anything about giving up their own ways or anything else, but it was to cooperate together. And they held the government accountable to the treaty. And through that, they have recovered most of their land. Now, somebody said to me, well, that wouldn't work here because it's a small country. And maybe it is, but I don't think the will for that is the same here as it is there. And we are much bigger and we are much more diverse, but it was pretty amazing to hear that, because they now got their land back, and so the businesses that are on their land pay rent. Bills. And so it was an awesome experience. And you know, just to be there. I'm going back someday. I don't know when, but I'm going back. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions at this point.
Pauline, in the bigger picture, you had a very large number of indigenous people from all over the world.
Yes.
What is your sense? I mean, the United Nations has recently worked on the Charter for the Rights of Indigenous People. Various countries have signed on, and various countries have been dragged in. Is the cause of indigenous people advancing worldwide, or is it hit and miss? What was your sense coming out of the conference?
Well, one of the things that New Zealand is working on now is from Hawaii and all that Pacific Rim.
Mm-hmm.
Those people are all
Polynesian.
Polynesian. They're all connected because of they immigrated from different islands, and they're trying to bring those all into one confederacy, which would, I think, benefit everybody. So for me, that's a positive. I think that's going to be an ongoing project for a long time to get them all together, like Samoa, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, all of those islands to form a confederacy. So in that way, I see that it would is an advancement. I think that while there's still a lot of work to be done for people to understand who we are as Indigenous people, there's a lot of, it still shocks me when I talk to people who say they don't know anything about residential schools. They don't understand why the Aboriginal people are the way they are. After all of the publicity that has been around the Truth and Reconciliation, people can still say that, and just don't know. And so it's a lot of work. I think we just have to keep letting people know who we are and what we are. But I do think that things are getting better, but it's a slow process. In my teachings, they say I am affected by the 7 generations before me, and I affect the 7 after me. So for us to expect instant results is a little bit
Countercultural.
well, not countercultural, just I'm trying to think of the word that I'm looking for.
Unrealistic.
Unrealistic is a good word, yeah. You know, that it takes time and patience and continuous work of being and trying to share what we know with others.
Pauline, your visit or your trip to New Zealand corresponded with the formal presentation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations to the government. Were you able to share any of those recommendations with the people who attended the conference in New Zealand?
No,
No?
I didn't. It wasn't. I don't think anyone presented on that,
Nobody did.
as far as I can recall. Yeah.
When I was in New Zealand, I was told that there are no 100% pure Maori people left now. And so I'm just wondering, how do they determine who is eligible for the programs and who is not?
They don't go do a blood count. If you've got one drop of Maori somewhere in your ancestry, you're Maori.
Okay.
Deidre has, I think she had 9 children. So she's got something like 39 grandchildren, and some of them are as blonde and blue-eyed as anybody from Iceland or Sweden. So they don't.
So they don't worry about that.
No. The other
Not like
very
here where, well, you can be on the reserve, you can't be on the reserve,
You know, and that's a political decision. It's not ours.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Have they had issues with residential schools there?
yes, they have the schools there as well. Yeah. I don't think, I don't know whether they ran as long as they did here, but yeah, there was. And, but they have reclaimed their language very, very much. And one of the strengths, I think, of them being able to reclaim their, is that they never really put it aside. Deidre she can trace her ancestry back 19 generations. And she said it's not only knowing who they were, and it's both sides of the family that she traces back like this, but she needs to know what they were known for in their life. So this is an oral history that's passed down. Her son is in the process of learning those. So being able to trace that back, and that's one of the first things, like, often in Indigenous people, wherever I am, whether it's here, whether it's in Belize or wherever, one of the first things you're asked is, who's your family? It may, or where you're from. And saying where you're from sometimes lets them know who your family is. Well, this is New Zealand, they trace it back that far. And if you two Maoris meet, if they've never talked before, they'll soon be into who they're related to. And in a formal ceremony, Deidre needs to be able to recite those 19 generations back. Although she said, because if everybody was reciting their full genealogy back, there'd be days just doing introductions, so they usually go back only 4 or 5 generations, but she needs to know that in case somebody asks further back. And I think that's one of the strengths of them in keeping their culture and their heritage as strong as it is. The language is spoken all over the place. And
This elders organization is worldwide, is it? Are there projects that they run in various parts of the world, or is it this meeting the primary project?
the Healing Our Spirit Worldwide, the vision for that was to bring Indigenous people around the world together to share healing ways. So whether it's the plant medicine, whether it's whatever, to share what has worked in healing from the results of colonization and disruption. So that, as far as I know, is what it's about.
Is the Maori language taught in school?
Yes.
So everybody learns the Maori
I
language?
don't know whether it's taught in all schools. Certainly on the marae, the school is totally taught in Maori. But whether the general public schools are immersion or not, I don't think so.
Or a second language?
Yeah, second language for many of them.
But
Maori.
yeah.
I didn't, I mean, there were so many questions that
Not bad.
but, you know, and just being able to just experience, I went over there and, you know, you're never far from the ocean, so I often have sinus congestion. Boy, it was cleared up just like that. So I want to go back.
As a tourist, are you allowed to visit one of these maraes? Or do you have to have a special introduction and greeting?
I think that, I'm not sure. I would think that there would be some that would be open to that as part of tourism. But because I was traveling with indigenous people, it wasn't something I thought about. One of the other things, of course, was that many of the people at the conference went to Hobbiton. They did the Hobbit movies in New Zealand, and they've kept the scenery there, and it's become quite a tourist attraction.
So, were there any healing practices that you experienced or heard talked about at your conference that were new to you, or things that happened at the conference that you thought, oh, I'd like to see that happen here?
At the conference itself, not particularly. It was my experience afterwards that went, oh wow, if we could only have that here. The visit, the 2 days we spent at the marae was corrections with the
to answer your
restorative justice. That's the word I was looking for their program.
When I was in New Zealand, we were allowed to go on a marae, but we on site, but it had been arranged formally, and you couldn't enter. We had to follow the formality, and it was a privilege. Like, we had to wait outside at the gate, and you everything was explained to us, but we had to wait, and the elder person chanted us in, and then we spent, I think, pretty much the day, but it was all guided and teaching us about their ways, and we did weaving, but it was arranged for us. I don't think you can just
No, you can't just
go.
walk on. And it was rather interesting. As I said, I stayed at the dorms, and a cousin of mine from Manitoba was also staying there, so we hung out quite a bit. And then we were to stay the night after we left the dorms on the marae. However, by the time we left Hamilton to go back to Auckland, it would have been dark. And because Laura hadn't been welcomed onto the marae formally before, we couldn't go, or she couldn't go, because they do not welcome anybody onto the marae after dark. And I asked why, and they said, well, you know, back in the old days when the tribes were fighting, there might be an enemy wanting to come into your marae, so you didn't bring them in at night because you couldn't see who they were. And so her and I stayed at a hotel that night, and she missed the experience of being able to stay on the marae, but she, you know.
In your time there, we were only there for 3 weeks, and one of the things that I noticed was that, particularly in Auckland, the marae names every street, much more so than here. the language and the
Yes.
Maori names, it's throughout New Zealand.
Yeah.
Very hard to
I just
spell a
made
lot of
it,
the
yeah.
things.
Well, they pronounce things a little differently, like going down to Ferengi, it's spelled W-H-A-R-A-N-G-E-I, Ferengi.
Yeah.
The W-H is pronounced as an F.
But I just felt that the Maori influence, but just 3 weeks, and you don't know, you're just there. But I just felt more of the indigenous presence in New Zealand, just much more. And I thought that was really surprising. The names were very much Maori.
Mhm. I noticed that as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is there an English word that would be equivalent to Maori? Is that similar to, say, county or?
No,
What?
I think the nearest I could compare it to would be like a community center here, only it's much more in that it's their spiritual place as well as their community gathering place. So I don't think that, I can't think of, perhaps the BC with their longhouse may be, but I don't know enough about BC's ways to be able to say for sure, but it's their community center, it's their spiritual gathering place, they hold their ceremonies, their meetings, their place of governance, really, it's, yeah.
The people living there now, you said they got all their land back. So do they have ownership of land just like the rest of the people that have moved there? Or is it held by the community or?
It's, I think, held by the, Deirdre talked about her territory. And I don't know whether it was her piece of land or whether it was tribally owned. It's a question I didn't ask, sorry.
No, I was just interested. I've been to New Zealand and I was very impressed by everything I saw and the welcoming and everything. But I was just wondering, when we claim ownership, it's different from what the native people here consider ownership of their land and what the colonizers did too. So that's why I'm asking.
And I want to say that it's probably the territory is tribally recognized, but whether there's ownership of particular pieces of land within that territory, I know that Deirdre's land down at Matariki is where she plans to retire someday, and it's, you know, a fair piece of land that she has there, and she refers to it as her territory. So I'm not quite sure how that is. It's a question I'll have to ask her. She is coming to Canada.
Good idea.
She's got a daughter that's married here in Canada, so she's coming to welcome grandchild number 40.
Oh, do you know when she'll be in town for this blessed event?
Next week.
For how long?
I should be here at least a month.
Really?
Yeah.
It would be interesting to have her speak here, if possible.
I'd have to ask her about it because she very definitely said she hates the cold, so she's not planning to go too far from where out of the house.
Well, you know, the cars are warm and they get us from here to there.
Do they have the reservation system there as we have here?
They have territories, but they're not reserves, no.
People with their.
People have their traditional territories, but it's not reserves like it is here, no. Either I talk fast or...
Pauline, if you don't mind coming back to Canada in a sense, can you tell us a little bit about what you spoke about at the conference and about the local situation?
But we spoke about Kichiaski and That's the old Fox Farm. And it's been a 7-year process of getting that land from the city. And so we spoke about, from the beginning, from Lewis and Will's vision about having a place for the indigenous people to go to pray in the city, because there was no place. And as you know, not all of our people have cars, so it was difficult to get out to sweat lodges and ceremonies and so on and so forth. So that was the basis of the idea, was to get a piece of land. And so it was working with the city. Well, the first thing that happened was to bring all the elders and the community leaders together, the chiefs and the elders and so on and so forth, and say, is this something you, because it's not only about who's living in Edmonton, it affects everybody that's come in from the reserves, everybody that may be coming in to visit from the reserves, maybe go to school for a couple of years and then go back home. Whether this was something that they thought was a good idea. And so, yes, there were some that said, oh, you can't have this in the city because the air is polluted, but the consensus was that, yes, this was a good idea because our people needed a place to go. And so then it was negotiating and working with the city over that period of time. And right now we have, I think it's 30 or 40 acres, I'm not just too sure, down there where the farm was, that we can use for ceremonies. Right now it's sitting that the city's taken on their responsibility was to clean the land and return it to its natural state. So they've been working on taking down the buildings, and there's been a few surprises that showed up when they started taking down the buildings, because they discovered some swimming pools that have been closed over, and so those had to be taken out. And I think right now they're at the process where, and I'm not totally sure exactly where it is, but one of the surprises was they found an underground storage tank, and they don't know what was stored in it. So they have to do an analysis and see what needs to be cleaned with the soil there. One of the comments was, it's surprising nobody went through into it before now because it was that deteriorated. So there's been a few surprises, and the vision that we see right now, and we talked about up to this point, we didn't talk about what's happening with the cleaning of the land, we just said it had to be cleaned. And our vision is that we have 4 sweat lodges there, which will accommodate for different ways of doing ceremonies. There's going to be an amphitheater there so we can bring the kids in for teachings. We visualize a medicine garden so we can teach the kids about the traditional medicines and how to pick them and all of that process. The building that will be there will be built into the earth so that it becomes part of the landscape. So we'll keep it as natural looking as possible. That's our vision about it.
I'm sorry, I don't know, where is that?
Fox Farm? You know where Fort Edmonton is?
So is it down near the Equine Center?
Yep, right across from it.
Yeah, it's near there, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, right across the highway from the fort.
Oh, I see.
Part of the city's agreement was that they will put a bus turnaround in there so that people can come up by bus.
And it's right along White Mud Creek, where White Mud Creek runs into those.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Saskatchewan.
So there's that kind of a park there right now, like my
In,
park.
in New Zealand, is the Maori population somewhat comparable in size to the Aboriginal people in Canada? Are there the people who've come to New Zealand from other nations numerous?
I think if we go percentage-wise, that there's probably more Maori. but I was hanging out with some Maoris, so that's all, you know, I didn't see
Yeah.
too much of the rest of the population. I was disappointed that I didn't, they talk about all the sheep in there, but I wasn't in an area where they raised the sheep. Actually, I saw more cows than sheep. But, yeah, so,
Saw the sheep
so yeah, I
where
would,
you concentrate.
my sense is that it would be a higher percentage.
And I think the Maori have a constitutional right to appoint a certain number of people, Maori representatives, to their national parliament.
Again, I didn't get into the politics of things, so I try to avoid that as much as possible.
Did you think that they were being integrated into society more than we are here?
No. How do you mean integrated?
Well, participating in everyday life more than our native people are. What I thought when I was there was that there weren't that many distinguishing marks that you could say. There were a lot of Maori people that were being employed the same way as the colonizers. I thought they were on an equal scale with the people that were living there. They weren't being put down the way our native people have been.
I would be inclined to agree with you, you know, that there are strong people who have claimed their place. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Rob at this point.
I'm just going to see if there are, I don't want anybody to leave, and then you get outside the door and you say, I forgot to ask that question. Don't want that to happen. So,
I
this
guess
is
my other
yeah.
question would be, of the people that you met there, either from New Zealand or other people who came from afar, who have you kept in touch with, and who will you continue to keep in touch with?
I certainly will continue to have a relationship with Deidre.
Right.
And some of the people that I met through her. Always for me, it's a blessing when I can travel in a country as a visitor and not as a tourist.
Of course.
And so those would be the connections I will be maintaining.
It'd be wonderful if Deidre could come and talk here. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, well, we just have to make sure the weather cooperates.
Well, from car to building.
Yeah.
We'll bring the
It's
weather.
official, we've asked for good weather one day here.
Like
Yeah.
they say in Phoenix,
We'll
it's
order it.
always 70 degrees. It's 70 degrees in the airport, it's 70 degrees in the taxi, it's 70 degrees in the hotel, it's 70 degrees in the banquet room. It's always 70 degrees. Last word would be Pauline's, and then I'm going to, on your behalf, thank her. One of our traditions in the Interfaith Center is we are always pleased to give our guest speaker a calendar. Now, Pauline probably has a dozen of these already, but this one reflects our gratitude for your being with us today and telling us about New Zealand and making us all quite covetous. We all now are planning to run off to our favorite travel agent and see what kind of fare we can get to go to New Zealand. This is the perfect time of the year to go. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you.